This is DVB, a tutor on logic and philosophy. Today we're going to talk about an argument that William Lane Craig has provided against the view that truth-making is closed under logical implication. So we're not actually going to talk about whether truth-making is in fact closed or not under logical implication. But what I'm more interested in is talking about what does it mean for, say, a sentence P to logically imply a sentence Q, and to compare that versus material implication. And along the way, we're going to show that Craig confuses the two notions, and so his argument against the view that truth-making is closed under logical implication is not sound. It has a false premise. Just to fix our symbols here, we have this conditional represents material implication. So this says a sentence of the form P materially implies a sentence of the form Q. And here we're going to use the double turnstile, and this will represent the notion of, or the relation of logical implication. Let's talk about Craig's argument. So he says that, moreover, Howard-Snyder seems to assume that truth-making is closed under logical implication. And then Craig says, here's his thesis, this assumption is false. That is, it's not true, says Craig, that truth-making is closed under logical implication. And he's going to give what I take to be a counterexample to this view. So Craig says, for example, let's call this sentence A. Consider the sentence A cat has retractable claws, logically implies that grass is green, since both are true, but they obviously have different truth makers. So what we're going to do here is formalize Craig's argument, and one of the premises that the argument employs is that the sentence A cat has retractable claws, implies that grass is green, and we're going to show that this premise is false. So before we formalize Craig's argument, though, let's put a few sentences down that we can use to formalize his argument. So the thesis under question, which Craig is attacking and attributes it to Howard-Snyder, is the view that truth-making is closed under logical implication. Truth-making all right, that's one sentence we're going to use to construct Craig's argument. Another sentence we're going to use is a statement about, or a sentence about sentences A and B. We'll call it sentence D, and this is the view that the sentence a cat has retractable claws logically implies that what? That grass is green. To use our symbol up here, this is tantamount to simply saying A logically implies B. So later on, this is the sentence we're going to take issue with. To move along, though, let us say that the sentence E is the view that A and B have the same truth maker. So I would express one premise of Craig's argument. It goes as follows. If it's the case that truth-making is closed under logical implication, so if C is true, and it's the case that A logically implies B, then Craig thinks a consequence of this is that A and B have the same truth maker. All right, so that's the first premise. The second premise is Craig's view that the sentence, "a cat has retractable claws," logically implies the sentence, "grass is green." So Craig's second premise, we'll say, is D. Craig's third premise is that, as he says here, obviously sentence A and B have different truth makers. So his third premise is that the sentence E, namely that A and B have the same truth maker, is false. So Craig's third premise is not E. The conclusion that he wishes to draw is that it's not the case that truth-making is closed under logical implication. So real quick, I'm going to prove this and show that the argument that Craig gives here is in fact valid. All right, so now that we've given a proof of Craig's conclusion that it's not the case that truth-making is closed under logical implication, we've proven it given the premises he gives, we can conclude now that Craig's argument is valid. So we can say, good job, Craig, you've given us a valid argument. But I'm going to show that nonetheless, it's not sound. So if an argument is valid, but not sound, that means that one of its premises is false. So which premise do I think is false? Well, I'm going to try and show that at least premise 2 is false. That's the suspect premise, namely that A logically implies that B. So I hope to show that premise 2 is false. That is, I hope to show that the sentence, "a cat has retractable claws," does not logically imply that grass is green. So to do this, though, I have to talk a little bit about what counts as logical implication, or what it means for a sentence to logically imply another sentence. So to do that, we have to talk a little bit about valuations. So by valuation, I just mean this: a truth value assignment. So, for example, let's have the sentence A and B on a truth table, and right here is a truth value assignment. We've assigned true to A and true to B. So we'll call this valuation 1, and it's the valuation in which we assign A true and B true. Well, is this all valuations? No, there's other valuations. There's also the valuation in which we give A true and we give B false. So this will be valuation 2. And in this case, though we give A the value true, we give B the value false, and so on. So each individual ones here are valuations. They are a truth value assignment to sentences in question, in this case A and B. So now that we have the notion of a valuation, we can now define what it means for a sentence, say P, to logically imply a sentence, say Q. And so here, P and Q represent any sentence whatsoever, and they themselves are not sentences. Here's our definition. We will say that P logically implies a sentence Q just in case the following obtains: that there is no valuation, that is a truth value assignment, in which whatever sentence we put in for P is true, but that whatever sentence we put in for Q is false. So to see how this definition can be used to employ whether some sentence P logically implies some sentence Q, consider the following. So let our P be the sentence A, let our Q be the sentence either A or not B. So in order to find out if A logically implies the sentence either A or not B, we have to find out if there is any valuation in which the sentence A is true and the sentence A or not B is false. So to do this, we have to make a truth table and put our sentences which we want to assign truth values to. So the only ones that will be relevant to figure out if A logically implies either A or not B are those valuations in which the sentence A is true. So the only time that is for, there's two possibilities here. And already here we know that if A is true, then the disjunction either A or not B is true. And same here. The other two possibilities are going to be when A is false, but that won't be relevant as to whether, in fact, the sentence A logically implies the sentence either A or not B. So because there is no valuation in which the sentence A is true, but the sentence either A or not B is false, we have shown here that the sentence A logically implies either A or not B. Okay, so we've seen an example now of how this definition can be used to show whether a sentence logically implies another sentence. And we will now do it to show that Craig's claim that A logically implies B is false. So let's go ahead and erase this truth table. And so his claim is that A logically implies B. We saw that here. He says, for example, A cat has retractable claws, logically implies B, that grass is green. That's his premise here. That's our second premise. And that's what we're going to show isn't true. So let P be A, let Q be B, and let's see if there's a valuation in which A is true and B is false. Well, it won't be the valuation in which A is true and B is true, because under that valuation, A is true and B is true. But one possible one is where A is true, but B is false, in which case A will be true and B will be false. So there is, on the second valuation here, it's one in which our sentence A is true, but our sentence B is false. And therefore, A does not logically imply B. So, premise 2 of Craig's argument is false. Okay. One might argue, though, Craig actually gives an argument. He says, look, the sentence A cat has retractable claws, logically implies that grass is green, and he gives an argument. His view is, since both are true, so perhaps we can recapitulate Craig's view here. It goes something like this. Look, a cat has retractable claws. Premise 2, grass is green. Therefore, A logically implies B. Again, given what it means for A to logically imply B, this isn't true. What I think is going on is Craig has in mind not logical implication, but material implication. It's true that if A is true and B is true, then A materially implies B. But this is irrelevant to Craig's argument. The issue is not material implication, but it's logical implication. And so the mere fact that the material implication, A materially implies B, is true, given that both these sentences are true, is utterly irrelevant to whether in fact A logically implies B. That's what he's going to need in order to have a counterexample for the claim that truth-making is closed under logical implication. We've seen that this isn't true, and he needs that, and therefore his argument is not sound.